Welcome to the political spectrum. Understanding the various parties. So, sorry about that. So, as being a new voter, you probably are unfamiliar with the political parties in the United States, and that's okay. Because in all honesty, political ideologies and parties are kind of fluid, especially since America is what they call a catch-all party system. And what that means is American parties tend to keep things pretty broad. So as a result, there can be a wide disparity even among people within one party. So you'll have some very moderate Republicans and some very far right-wing Republicans. You'll have some moderate Democrats and some extremely left-wing Democrats. So it is important to look at the individual candidate because sometimes they won't always perfectly align with one party or the other. That being said, since we are going to be moving along with this process, I think it's best to at least have a basic familiarity with these parties, what they are, how they tend to vote, and what the rules are governing them. So, the Democratic Party. So, here's how they stand on some of the major issues. They're pro-choice. That means that they are in favor of abortion. They prefer to keep abortion legal within the country. They tend to favor gun control laws, so they want more laws that would limit access to firearms or particular higher grades of firearms or require background checks for firearms, etc. They tend to be in favor of marijuana legalization. They're in favor of rights for LGBTQ, that means lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, and queer individuals. They tend to favor what's called a social safety net. What the social safety net means is it refers to policies that are designed to provide a backup plan so that people that do fall into a hard time have an easier chance of getting it out. This means things like welfare, affirmative action, things like basic food stamps and stuff like that. The idea is that if you do happen to fall on hard times, there's a litany of services in existence to help you out on that. It also involves a conceptualization of the world in which many of the problems can be solved through systematic changes. So, Democrats tend to be of the belief that things like poverty is at the root of things like crime and things like that. And so if you solve problems like poverty, then you might solve the other problems. Better if you provide relief for people's lack of housing, or food sources, or education, you'll solve other societal problems. Now, Democrats, especially in New York, favor free college. So they are behind things like the Excelsior Scholarship, which will give you free college within the state of New York. Now, in order to fund all of the social safety net and the free college and things like that, they do insist on higher taxes, both for businesses and often for individuals. Now, they also favor environmental regulation, which got cut off by the picture of the donkey here. They tend to be more pro-feminist and more in favor of women's rights, and they tend to have a more open immigration policy. They are more in favor of other people coming to the country, and are more in favor of working with those who have arrived here under less than legal circumstances, rather than expelling those people outright. Now, Republican Party, they tend to be pro-life, so they are against abortion. They tend to take the stand that life begins at conception. So from the moment the child is conceived, it's now a human person, and thus has legal rights of its own. They also tend to prefer gun rights. Republicans tend to favor citizens having access to different types of weapons for their own protection and for the protection of their personal property. Now, they aren't against legalization of drugs. They're still big fans of the war on drugs, higher and harsher drug penalties. They tend to advocate traditional marriage, meaning that they do not favor gay marriage. Now, they tend to view societal problems in terms of a lens of personal responsibility. So to them, they look at it as people who are in a bad ways. They've fallen into a life of crime or something like that. They tend to view that as being that person's fault. And so society, in their mind, has no obligation to help them out. So to them, many of them will argue that having a social safety net like free university, or more money towards public education, or welfare, something like that, they argue discourages the individual from taking personal responsibility for their life and actions because the government will help them out. That's the Republican logic on the question. Now, because they don't want to have as big of a government, they do often capitalize on the fact that they can offer lower taxes. Your taxes tend to be lower, as long as it's not a war year, when there are Republicans in office. Note, war years throw everything out of whack because both parties can often spend astronomical amounts on war spending. Then you have economic freedom. So, as it sounds like, Republicans tend to want to allow business to do more of what it wants. They don't want to place limits on big companies. They believe that by allowing companies to expand more freely without wage regulations or environmental regulations, they'll create more jobs and more prosperity, and it will grow things out that way. Now, they also tend to favor much harsher immigration restrictions. Republicans are less willing to invite new folks into the country, even legally, and they tend to have a very low, if not non-existent, tolerance for those who entered illegally and simply wish them all gone. So let's talk about the Green Party. Now, the Green Party is a single-issue party founded around environmental issues. So what that means is the Green Party is only concerned with protecting the environment. They don't really care about the economy so much, or helping out poor folks or anything like that. It's just, or education, guns, or anything like that. What they care about is the environment. What is best for the environment? Now, how about the Libertarians? Because we see a lot of them in New York. So, Libertarians, you'll notice, take positions that kind of seem like an odd medley of Democrat and Republican positions. They're pro-choice, in favor of marijuana legalization, and in favor of LGBTQ rights, similar to Democrats. However, they also favor gun rights, personal responsibility, lower taxes, and economic freedom, similar to Republicans. Again, Libertarians, they like personal freedom, so if you want to have an abortion, have one. You want to smoke weed? Go ahead. Note, that's just Libertarians. As a teacher in New York, I'm not allowed to encourage you to smoke weed. If you want to, do whatever, they're fine with that. But they don't want to pay for it. So again, they don't want to pay for free college. They don't want to pay to make sure that poor people or old people get food stamps. That's not their thing. You can do whatever you want, so long as they're not paying for it. So now you've kind of gotten a view of the parties. You can look back over the sheet and try to figure out, just right now, are there any of them that you're feeling particularly cuddly with, you could say. Any of these guys kind of sound like they jive with your opinion. Now, at this point, you're probably going, wait, Mr. Skanga, you forgot one from the list we compiled. You never mentioned terrorism or racism. So I didn't exactly mention terrorism, because terrorism can get kind of dicey. Because while all the parties will say they're anti-terrorism, you can get some weird flip-flopping on the issues. Libertarians will scream about personal freedom quite a bit, and libertarians will usually argue that expanding government surveillance programs and other stuff like that will keep are taking away people's personal freedoms. Green Party doesn't really care. Democrats and Republicans will kind of flip-flop depending as terrible as to say, based on the tragedy of the day. If there's a recent terrorism attack, they're always, well, what can we do to prevent terrorism? And if it's been a while and people are more concerned with the NSA snooping into people's personal business, then they're like, okay, we need to put a leash and muzzle on the NSA, blah, blah, blah. So, it's iffy. Neither, especially in New York, no one is going to want to come across as the party that's light on terrorism. It's that simple. New York City is just too close to the rest of the state. No one in New York State, at least, is going to want to come down as being light on terrorism. So now what about racism? Oh boy. Now we get into the difficult part. We get into the weeds a little bit. So none of the above parties officially endorse racism. You're not going to find one of the parties that says officially that they are the party of the racists. So it's not quite that simple. Now also, both Democrats and Republicans have had a spotty history when it comes to racism. Modern-day Republicans have gotten accused of racism quite a bit with mass incarceration programs, which disproportionately seem to find young African-American males in prison. They've also been discussed how the war on drugs has disproportionately devastated African-American communities, things of that nature, as well as actions under a certain Donald Trump, and many of his stances have caused issues. On the other side, Democrats, they've had, during the 1800s and even up through the 1920s and 30s, they had a very strong presence in the South, where they were in favor of Jim Crow laws for quite a bit. There were a few prominent Democrats, including Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, who was associated with the Ku Klux Klan. So it's nasty. So neither party can entirely wash its hands of the issue, at least not the major parties. Libertarians don't know a lot. Now, what about... So then you may say, okay, well, if neither party officially endorses the racists, where will all the racists be voting at? Like what are they doing with themselves? They got to be doing something with themselves come election season. So what are they doing? Well, most racists do tend to inhabit the right wing of politics, because most of them by nature are either direct Nazis or they tend to have fascist tendencies. So they tend to populate the political right wing. So as a result of that, most of them, because, especially in areas where they don't have a local Nazi party or something like that, note, there technically is one that exists still in the U.S. Don't ask me where it's polling or if it's on the ballot here, because it better not be on the ballot here. I've never seen it on the ballot in Ulster County, and with good reason. It shouldn't really be on the ballot anywhere, but I digress. So, because a lot of them will find themselves without such a party, they will tend to vote either Republican or Libertarian. Now, this is the $1,000 question comes up next. Well, is their support welcome? So obviously, yeah. If there's some type of right-winger. So again, if you're some type of right-winger, you're going to vote for a right-wing party. So if you're a Republican candidate or a Libertarian candidate, it may not be all that, it's probably not all that surprising for you to expect that you may have, among your voters, you may have a few Klansmen somewhere. That does happen. Now, here's the million-dollar question, though. Do politicians in these right-wing parties, Republicans and Libertarians, do they welcome the support of these various racist elements, Klansmen, neo-Nazis, stuff like that, or do they want nothing to do with it? The problem is, in big parties like the Republican Party, that answer, unfortunately, can vary dramatically from politician to politician. You got some like Donald Trump that are perfectly happy to take their support, while you have others that are like, no, I want nothing to do with these guys. They're not us. And that becomes an issue.